Yeah, this is a kind of different one from Braden. He did send, it's kind of from Braden. He sent a podcast, but to be honest, I didn't have a clue what they was talking about. I don't know nothing about this. I know this is like some of the stuff we've been doing from, well, I suppose some is American, but this is the satanic cult built into I'm guessing it built into the establishment. It's the sex trafficking cult America forgot, which countries never forget. It gets covered up. That's why people forget, and it's not talked about, is because the media is way more controlled than people think it is. But yeah, um, I actually don't know I don't know anything about this specific case. So yeah, let's see what this is saying. Let's go.
In the shadows of Omaha, Nebraska, there lurked monstrosities the world had yet to fathom. It was the quintessential Midwestern town, yet beneath the serenity, a malignant darkness festered. It was here that a vile scandal of systemic sexual abuse and satanic worship unfolded within the very institutions that were meant to protect the city from itself. In the mid-1980s, the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union served the most disenfranchised and underprivileged communities of Omaha. It operated under the guidance of Lawrence E. King Jr. He was a socialite, friends with those who were in positions of power, politicians and police who found themselves indebted to his favor. King sat on the boards of charitable organizations and seemed to give back to his community. But beneath this crafted exterior pulsed a darkness accused of some of the worst crimes imaginable.
Yeah, this is yeah, what he's saying here. We have exactly the same things. These people. I was thinking Fred and Rose West. Now, Fred and Rose West aren't even held. They are a famous case in our country, but they're not held to be connected to anything. They're seen to be idiot country bumpkins, but by all accounts, West was basically what this guy was. Using, like, he had connections in the police. The police would go around and do whatever they did. But yeah, the Fred and Rose West thing. But the way that the media portrays them to the British public is that they're just a pair of idiots, but they're not. Their story's way deeper than just a pair of idiot animals.
Investigators initiated an audit of the credit union, uncovering malicious and grotesque deceit. King was charged with 40 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, stealing over $39 million. Yet, the startling revelation of his financial crimes would only be the beginning. The investigation uncovered a horrifying narrative, stitched together by the testimonies of children. They named King as the architect of nightmares like ritualized abuse, cultist ceremonies, and a web of political blackmail that implicated figures like Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. They described a sinister underbelly of cruelty and corruption, the aftermath of which still echoes through the nation. The story of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union begs a profoundly unsettling question. What if the very institutions meant to protect become the architecture of unimaginable horror? The Franklin Community Federal Credit Union was established in 1968 with the intention of making credit accessible to the African American community of North Omaha. It was a low-income credit union formed by community activists. It was a cornerstone of communal support and it attracted deposits from charities, nonprofit organizations, and struggling individuals. The credit union offered certificates of deposit to non-members, and they provided financial services and education for residents, even helping when they couldn't cover their water or power bills. Lawrence E. King Jr. would become the manager in 1970, just 2 years after its establishment. Under his direction, the Franklin Credit Union expanded its services, like the initiative with the Consumer Service Organization, which managed welfare, disability, and Social Security checks. This expansion allowed a significant addition to the coffers of the Franklin Credit Union. King began offering high-interest certificates of deposit. They marked at 2 to 3% above market rates in an attempt to secure greater deposits at the credit union, and it was instrumental to the growth of the institution. However, it quickly became a Ponzi scheme where additional CDs were required to cover payments for maturing ones. These rates attracted investments and grants from corporate powerhouses and religious organizations, securing millions for the credit union. King leveraged these perceived successes to network with the movers and shakers of Omaha and later, the national political arena. King started as a McGovern Democrat, but he changed his affiliation and became the chairperson of the National Black Republican Council. He was tasked with coordinating.
Yeah, this is another thing that you see. They don't really have any. It's like in our country, you have the right and the left, but there's no real belief in either, like from the people that claim to be it, and they will change with the wind to keep their position, basically. And you see it with him, like just will go with whatever is going to be most lucrative, I guess.
Efforts to mobilize the black vote across 17 states, a role that placed him at the confluence of national politics and community outreach. King was a rising star of the GOP. He sang the Star-Spangled Banner at a Republican event in 1982 that was attended by President Reagan, and he sang the national anthem in 1988 at the RNC in New Orleans. Throughout the 80s, King became increasingly embedded in the Republican Party at the state and national level. His position with the Franklin Credit Union afforded him an annual salary of $16,000 a year, but King drove a $70,000 white Mercedes, chartered private jets and limousines, and rented multiple apartments and houses in Washington, D.C. and Omaha. He explained that his wealth came from old family money. The truth was much more sinister. King was exploiting his position at the credit union to fund his extravagant and debaucherous lifestyle. The Franklin Credit Union provided King with an inexhaustible bankroll. He expanded into multiple business ventures, owning restaurants and bars, including Omaha's Showcase Lounge, which was known to be frequented by pimps and sex workers. He began to donate heavily to Boys Town, a large orphanage in western Omaha started in 1917 as a shelter for young boys left behind with no family after World War I. In the 1990s, it was worth $500 million. The organization had expanded to owning its own school and church, where over 500 homeless and abandoned children were housed. Still, it was considered the richest square mile in the world. King also joined the board of directors for the Omaha Girls Club. He began to funnel vulnerable children from both organizations into his home, businesses, and parties under the guise of empowerment and employment. These children would allege realities far more horrifying than anyone could have anticipated. Before the shutdown of the Franklin Credit Union in November 1988, before the senatorial investigation and public unraveling, a complex web of disturbing rumors began to surface. These early whispers were first shared with law enforcement officers, social workers, and foster care administrators, hinting at a deeply entrenched network of sexual exploitation, abuse, and even satanic ritual, all implicating the city's most prominent figures. These initial reports were sporadic and often dismissed or downplayed by those in positions of authority, but as more victims came forward, the horrifying scope of these allegations could no longer be ignored.
This is the other thing as well. Even when I clicked on this video, you always get it. Always be suspicious of subjects that when you click on a video on YouTube, underneath it has the Wikipedia thing and says the satanic panic and gives you a explanation of, yeah, always be suspicious of them. But yeah, it's always the same thing. Multiple people looking the other way and letting it go. Um and the satanic, because you have the Reigns list of, I don't know whether it's, I think it's worldwide, but the Reigns list is Ritual Abuse Information Network and Support list, and the names on the list are people that have been accused of being involved in satanic ritual abuse. And their name, to make it on the list, you have to have two independent people say you was involved. So every name on the list has had double witness accounts to say that this person was there, independent accounts, and you can get in trouble for just um the platform in that list. But you see it where they said the care workers and all these people get told, the police get told, but it goes so deep. And again, Mark Dutroux, the Beast of Belgium. Look up that case. That case was so entrenched into the government and everything that they literally had to cover it up because it would have collapsed Belgium as a country. It would have took out their whole government, basically.
On June 10, 1985, a social worker with the Nebraska Department of Social Services received a call from the Sheriff's Department in Washington County. Records indicate the call was about child abuse complaints under the foster care of Jarrett and Barbara Webb. Jarrett was a board member of the Franklin Credit Union, and Barbara was Lawrence King's cousin. The call detailed 3 foster children who had significant bodily injuries. The children complained of abuse from their foster parents. They claimed that they had been beaten with a railroad iron and belt. The Webbs fostered 9 children, and more than half had run away from home in the past. During later investigations, DSS would remove several siblings from the home after reports from 6 of the children that they had been stripped nude and beaten for extended periods of time, and they had been denied meals. Unfortunately, the abuse didn't stop there. One victim, Lisa Webb, told Jane Tooley of the Sheriff's Department that she had been sexually abused since the age of 9. The Washington County prosecutor, Patrick Tripp, didn't believe Lisa's testimony. He required that she take 4 separate polygraph tests. She passed all 4 times, but Tripp attempted to discredit her, claiming that her story was too fantastical to be real.
Yeah, because that's the thing as well, why they don't allow the lie detectors in court. I don't think they do in America either. They definitely don't here, even though they're like 97% accurate or something like that. But there's people that think the reason that they don't is because if a lot of the leaders had to do a lie detector test about do you like children, they'd fail it. And so they don't even want to entertain that it can even be possible or admissible in court, even though, like a guy said, if lie detectors weren't accurate, think how much the TV shows would be sued every time they did a lie detector that was wrong. Like these TV shows that do lie detectors would, yeah, would get sued beyond belief. You destroy someone's family, saying the husband or the wife cheated or something, and they didn't, you're going to get sued. But no one ever sues. They deny, but they don't sue.
Tragically, this pattern of skepticism and disbelief would be a trend among investigators and prosecutors. Other children in the Webb home claimed to have found graphic images and videotapes, some portraying underage victims. They reported hearing that these materials had been produced and provided by Lawrence King. Julie Walters, a youth care worker at Boys Town, developed an extensive 51-page report based on interviews with Nellie and Kimberly Webb. She had extensive experience working with children who had suffered abuse, and she emphasized that the Webb children seemed truthful. Their narratives shared a remarkable level of detail, thematic consistency, and implicated figures, only enhancing their credibility. Nellie Webb reported that King would attend parties at the Omaha Girls Club, or he would throw parties at his home. King would call the Webbs and tell them to provide one or more children who would be forced to attend. She claimed the parties were attended by 30 adult patrons seeking the company of sex workers and children who were commingled. They would pay money, and the encounters would happen in communal areas, side rooms, or bedrooms. Horrifyingly, Nellie spoke about King flying her to Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C., where she met significant political players, including Vice President George Bush Sr. She described that these parties had countless bodyguards, admission keycards, and pat-down security, and behind closed doors, she saw powerful politicians engaged with young male sex workers. The Walters Report was given to the Department of Social Services in 1986, but there seemed to be little, if any, investigative interest. Barbara and Jarrett Webb lost their foster license, but they were not subject to any criminal charges for the abuses perpetrated. Separately, a 17-year-old girl and her mother filed a report with the Omaha Police Department after participating in an illicit photography session. The photographer, Rusty Nelson, approached the 17-year-old to be his subject for a European portfolio he was developing. The girl and her mother followed Nelson to his apartment for a 5-hour session where Nelson made inappropriate remarks and attempted to convince the girl to pose nude. The girl's mother noticed several nude photographs in the studio. Many of the subjects appeared to be minors. Officer Carmian interviewed the two women about the exploitation attempts of Rusty Nelson. They claimed that Nelson spoke of being self-employed, but regularly spoke of someone he called the boss. Investigators arrived at his apartment, and they found it had been vacated just 9 days after the initial report. The lease for Unit 3B in the Twin Towers apartment complex was registered under the name Lawrence King. When the FBI spoke with King, he said he had evicted Nelson when he heard about the incident. Officers discovered that King rented several units in the Twin Towers complex, including the penthouse, and an interview with the building manager revealed rumors that King was a heavy drug dealer with a preference for young boys. Nelson would later contend that King used his deep bankroll to make the investigation go away. Nelson would not be indicted on these charges, and he would disappear for several years before making critical contributions to the investigation in 1990. In 1988, Officer Carmian was dispatched to interview Shawnetta Moore, a 15-year-old girl whose testimony involved the same themes, players, and patterns of abuse, pointing again to a broad exploitation network within the city of Omaha. Moore was located at Richard Young Hospital, where she had told her therapist that she was the victim of nude photography and suffered at the hands of powerful men committing satanic rituals. Moore reported that she was friends with Kimberly and Nellie Webb, and that it began when all three of them were earning money by modeling for an unnamed photographer who was likely Rusty Nelson. Moore claimed that many of those photographing and purchasing photographs were leaders of the North Omaha Girls Club. She claimed she was coerced with threats of violence and that she reported the photography network to law enforcement and the superintendent of her school, Deward Finch. Finch was mentioned in previous testimony as a friend and frequent visitor of the Webbs, and nothing came from her criminal report. Moore reported that she was gradually introduced to ritualistic parties where kids were drugged. She described graphic and indecent acts performed by men at these parties, and she identified Lawrence King by name. She claimed that many of these ritualistic parties occurred at a home owned by King on Wirt Street. The investigating officer drove to the area and saw King's name printed on the awning of the home. The officer's report indicated that Moore seemed reluctant to trust, especially when King's name was mentioned, and it wasn't until later in 1988 that she was completely forthcoming. Her disturbing testimony about satanic ritual and abuse was later collected and entered into the Franklin Committee's senatorial investigation and report. Shawnetta Moore's testimony included descriptions of the homicides of several children, and she named King as a leading participant. She attended parties that were identical to the testimonies of the Webbs. She remembered votive candles scattered around the room, men cloaked in long robes, and descriptions of the rituals as power meetings. Smith recounted that she was locked in a room with a Caucasian infant and told that she could achieve great power by killing something that she really loved. The men decapitated the infant and removed the eyes before leaving the room. Smith stayed in the room overnight and described hearing whippings and beatings in the building. She was released the next day and told to return for the next power meeting. In fear for her life, she complied, and she saw the superintendent of her school and Lawrence King in attendance. She described 5 other instances of...
And that's what I mean. You see where the Christchurch one we did, it all links up to the same thing. It's like there's people in every walk of life that are involved in this, and this is how it gets to just disappear all the time. Because no matter what avenue it comes out from, whether it's child home, churches, where it doesn't matter where it's from, there's people within them organizations that can silence it, shut it up. It's all the same thing, and like literally everything they've said in this is exactly what everybody says about the same things here. It's like, and like he said, you have people with different people go into different things with the same stories, the same thing as what happened, and that's what we have in our country, and they still won't accept it. They still won't accept it. Like John Wedger says that our country don't admit to snuff movies, even people getting killed on camera. And John Wedger was a policeman. He's like, I know there's snuff movies, we saw them. But the government say no, they don't exist. They're a myth. It's why? Why are you lying about it? Well, we know why you're lying about it.
Ritualistic sacrifice, the details of which are more graphic than those already cited and included prolonged acts of dismemberment and cannibalism. Officer Carmian took these initial reports and told doctors at the Richard Young Hospital that he would return for more information. However, he never did. Carol Stitt later recounted to the Franklin Committee that caseworkers, employees, and therapists called Carmian, requesting that he return because Smith was still sharing new accounts. Senator Ernie Chambers would uncover that Carmian had been transferred out of investigations. Chambers would recall, I felt he'd been transferred because he was getting too close to something, and his superiors did not want him to continue. Some question.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know people are giving Donald Trump grief about this with the Epstein files, and I can understand because for a lot of people, the Epstein files is their first encounter with this type of thing. But if you actually do investigation into how much of this, like other Epstein files, basically other Epsteins, there have been throughout, especially recent history, that Yeah, like I don't. Donald Trump to release it. There's a lot of, like I say all the time, John Wedger. He's at the front. He's at the front line of exposing this stuff in our country, and there's even things he won't say. Is like because they will kill you. He gets told all the time, do not say, and like this guy saying, I felt he'd been transferred because he was getting too close to something. That's exactly what John Wedger experienced. He started getting too close. He started answering questions, and literally, a higher up police officer said, "Drop it, leave it alone." Um, yeah,
Moore's credibility. She had been hospitalized and suffered severe psychological trauma, and law enforcement reported that she had a history of bizarre interactions with officers. However, the Foster Care Review Board executive director, Carol Stitt, believed her testimony was highly credible. The chronology and the details were concrete, and they overlapped in detail with the Webbs, all of whom implicated Lawrence King. But this was only the beginning. Carol Stitt believed that the Omaha Police Department was failing to investigate thoroughly, or had even resorted to intimidating and discrediting witnesses. They seemed determined to make these stories go away. But still, the reports continued to grow in number. In May 1988, Kirsten Hallberg, an employee at Richard Young Hospital, reported 7 additional witnesses who had similarly horrifying and disturbing accounts connecting back to Lawrence King. Accounts that would soon be made public.
we'll pause it there so that we're in. We come back starting off with the Franklin Committee. But yeah, yeah, this is well, to be fair, it's not so crazy to me really because this is so common. Everything that they're saying is so common, from witness intimidation to, yeah, it's and it's something that, as well, a lot of people don't want to admit. That's another reason why it's easy to cover up, because deep down people don't want to deal with the horrendous truth that we live in. I don't want to admit the evil. People have been saying it a lot. I think people are more and more, but it's kind of a common phrase recently of the evil walking among us. It's so true, and that's why Epstein is kind of crazy, because was so big a story, and obviously he got killed. There is no kind of covering that up. No matter how hard you try, people aren't going to forget the Epstein thing. And but yeah, anyway, that's this part. Sweet.